Hey traders, welcome to the US equity update. Starting with the S&P, kind of two ways we can look at this. Starting with the potential rising wedge breakout with the retest, or it's going to be a big ABC running flat. Structurally speaking, I don't like that as because of this little big move in the middle here. Doesn't really have any B wave component that allows for that move. So it isn't ideal, but it is very possible, especially with kind of the buy the dip mentality the market's had over the last few years. Wouldn't be surprised for this to develop into that kind of running flat. But it's also very possible, like we said, what you're actually looking at is a rising wedge breakout and retest of that wedge. In which to see downside, that downside could become quite substantial moving forward. As it kind of plays into a higher narrative or higher time frame narrative that we are way overcooked on the higher time frames, sitting well beyond our full extent. So very much in line with a pullback from this region into probably at least the 3000s level, whether it's 3.6 or 3000 itself, I'm not quite sure, but we are due for a very decent pullback fairly soon. And if this narrative continues to play out and we continue to see downside, that's going to be the catalyst for that downside. We're seeing a similar picture in the NASDAQ. It's topped out at around about 342, the really big gap to the downside. Speaking, that move to the down is oversized in terms of the structures surrounding it. It could be a little bit of an expanding triangle, which is a bit of a bearish corrective structure. So you may see just a kind of double top corrective move, or move up to the double top and then the pullback. But again, higher time frames say we're overextended here. And when you look at the structure towards something that resembles further upside. So in order to confirm this downside, we'll watch for a little bit of a corrective structure in this region to point towards further downside down the road. The DJI, on the other hand, did higher. Structurally speaking, we should see at least a little bit of a deeper pullback in this region. If this was or was not a triangle, that is the question. But again, we're sitting at that very extended level on all time frames. The hourly does have a little bit more upside, if I'm not mistaken. So there's potential for a little bit more upside on the hourly, but that is the least accurate because the higher time frames are over. So we just have to watch what is going to form in this region and how things are going to behave in this region moving forward. So nothing really conclusive on the DJI. And the Russell continues to look super bearish. We spoke about how we've had a little bit of a corrective structure following a high, a little bit of a head and shoulders type move. And the Russell being a kind of higher risk trade, starting to show downsides before any of these other pairs or any of these other indices, is a big indicator as to the kind of future path of the rest of these indices. So we'll be keeping a close eye on this to see what's going to develop over the next few days and weeks. With Facebook and the techs. Facebook, we've concluded this was a bit of a triangle, and we've broken out of that triangle. Still a bit more upside here, but again, it's not something I'm a huge fan of. I will remain pretty defensive in terms of stocks. And like we said before, you're really just looking for stocks to get long using core options, but you look at apps. Facebook, to me, is not the ideal setup right now. Just don't trust how overextended it's been over kind of the last year or so. But structurally speaking, it does have a good argument for upside. So if you are looking to put some capital to work into something big, Facebook could be one of those. But I just get a gut feeling, in my view, that this isn't the one. You just need to be really cautious about what you're doing with this. Apple, starting to see that downside that we were looking for, starting to get some legs. Have to see if this is going to continue. If it is, we should go and see new lows on Apple, kind of below 115 and potentially as low as 103. So pretty decent downside on the cards there. Amazon also getting that downside we were looking for, and continuation to the downside should be part of the next few days and weeks. And we should see kind of 28.64 on Amazon. Microsoft starting to get some downside, but structurally speaking, we don't really have anything in terms of what a target could be or where to from here. So kind of on the sidelines in terms of this, but we are very much overcooked. Just want to show you the weekly chart on this. Very, very parabolic, very overcooked. So really just want to watch and see what, look for those short setups there. Netflix, I believe, still chopping around, but starting to break down from this little flag that we saw here, this little conglomeration of price action. This should continue to the downside from here, opening up a little bit pre-market, but I think an entry order below those lows and a break of those lows is a good place to get short. We should see downside of at least 440 and potentially beyond when the market starts to sell off, as we may be experiencing or as we suspect. Google's just continued overextension, not really much there for me. AMD looks like it's starting to break down. We do believe this is going to be a little bit more complex in structure, or it is a triangle that we've kind of misallocated. But yeah, we should see another leg higher and then the drop. If all of that is going to play out as a big flat pattern, which makes more sense than anything else. In terms of length of correction, we have not quite done enough. So I suspect big higher. You might see this develop into a kind of triangle, expanding triangle type price action. Lots of impulsive price action is worth noting in terms of the structure. Boeing continues to play out in the fashion we believe. Nice choppy, a little bit of a choppy beware, which is nice to see. We should get another leg higher up towards kind of 250, and that's going to be a good sell for that region. Alibaba continues to fade, as we spoke about, and been pretty vocal. We believe we're going to go see sub 200 in Alibaba. Some good downside so far. That should continue. Bank of America, where we're sitting again, we're just waiting for this kind of impulse to the downside and retest. I'm not really keen on anything long in this instance. Same with Berkshire, looking for that long, short impulse and a corrective structure. Beyond showing just how accurate our path has been following this ABCD blueprint that we've been speaking about for ages. So we should get another pop up towards 130, and then that's going to be an ideal short to see downside targets of around about $40. So big move to the downside potentially there. Citigroup, still kind of playing ball, still chopping around, although we'd like to see kind of a much deeper downside from here, maybe a double top on these lower time frames. A little bit concerning to see some of the other financials breaking higher. Just means that these structures are not really ready, and you're going to see another leg higher before you get that move to the downside and the correction that we're looking for. So kind of suspecting that's maybe what we're going to see here, given how we're struggling to get that downside. But until we break these highs at 76, this mirror the structure that we're looking at. CCJ, Camco, kind of broke higher, hasn't broken the highs yet at 1976. Still kind of sitting in expanding flat territory. If we break those highs, all bets are off. But generally speaking, still looking for downside. We'll just have to watch this. If we're wrong here, it just means we just need to shift this over after we get new highs and wait and see where to from there. Because right now, all you have is a structure that doesn't really make sense. Potentially a bit of a triangle in there, and the breakout of the triangle, it would be something along these lines. A, B, C, D, E, and then an impulse to the upside, in which case your upside target is kind of muted at around about 21. So just a little bit more upside than downside. So we'll just be watching this closely, but still keen to see some downside there. I believe the structure on the high time frames points towards that. Chipotle kind of getting some pretty strong downside considering the size of the trading. The fact that we're seeing such a big dip is kind of a little bit of a bearish structure too, from my point of view. So we may have seen a little bit of a wave failure here, and we may be on the downside already. Basically, we need to wait for something corrective to trade. That was a pretty decent flag, but considering the wider time frame structures, it wasn't really a trade we were looking at. I'm not really interested in right now. DraftKings continues to kind of follow our blueprint pretty spot on. Got some nice down. A little bit of a corrective move here, but we should see further downside down the line. As you can see, this is impulsive, expecting some choppiness, and that's kind of what we're getting. Seeing the same in Penn. No real change in the downside target. Still believe we're going to see sub 70 here. Disney starting to look pretty bearish. A little bit of an ABC. May have been a little bit of a contracting flat in this instance because of the lack of upside that we saw there. We've seen some pretty significant downside. Although pre-market where we're at now, you may see another leg higher. Maybe all of this was just part of the corrective structure. But generally speaking, I still see downside down the line. EA and the same picture, breaking through our trend line to the downside, but this is going to take some time to play out if it is going to be the move we're looking for. So we're just going to patiently wait for that. Just a reminder, when we go to EA, we see the outer timeframes, we see the structure. That's a very impulsive impulse. So we're definitely looking for something way more choppy than this. That's exactly what we're getting now. So just keep in mind with that, what kind of price action we're expecting moving forward. Expedia starting to move, nice to see. We expect this to go and break $100, so some pretty significant downside there. Price action is looking really good. It took a while to take off, but starting to get that downside we were looking for over the last few sessions. That should continue to the downside. Forward still looking good, giving us a little bit of a tradable wedge or tradable flag here. That's worth looking at. Structurally speaking, we should see this continue to the downside as well. And the much bigger picture also looks for downside. GDX kind of making a little bit of a recovery from those lows at 34, but structurally speaking, we still look good. Gold, I'm seeing gold is maybe a little bit more upside. So GDX may follow up a little bit higher, other leg higher, but that won't really affect the structure as we see it. You can still see a decent move. Gold going into kind of a running flat structure. You might see GDX pop another leg higher up towards 38, 39, somewhere there before falling down from there. But I still see downside in the future. Just about timing your move. Goldman Sachs, we broke the highs, so this whole structure that we were looking at is kind of been negated. Potentially going to see a little bit of a leg lower from here, and then another leg higher. Which doesn't really shift our mentality. We're not looking for anything in terms of trades getting long. Maybe we can look for a short-term call option long at this 320 region, but again, higher time frames, still looking for that short trade, just kind of getting the timing of the move right and finding the right price structure. Right now, just kind of sitting on the sidelines, waiting for something worth trading. Morgan Stanley, kind of approaching that same area, especially if Goldman's broken new highs. I expect Morgan Stanley to follow suit. And again, you're just looking at a bit of a corrective structure. When you look at this B wave, it's kind of a little bit shabbier than the Goldman Sachs one, but it does point towards another leg to the downside before further upside. But generally speaking, we're still looking for the shorts, especially in Morgan Stanley. So like I said, we may just go with a little bit of a call option strategy. You can trade kind of from 75 up towards 90, take a little bit of profit and then flip that around. But I'd really like to see a very clean, corrected structure here before we even take some time to play out. IBB, biotech breaking lower, looking really good. We expect the structure to continue to play out in this fashion. So probably go and break these lows at 145, pop another leg high up towards 160, and then see a fall from there. Structurally speaking, we're looking really good for that big move to the downside. IBM continues to move higher towards our sell zone, which is around about 160. Not much of a story there. Intel Corp continues to fall from our highs. There's some good downside potential here. This should go and move and break this 44, 45 level, these lows at 43.66 before anything, but you might see some choppiness first, in which case you'll get a good entry for your short. Right now, looking pretty bearish. Johnson & Johnson, kind of still chopping around. Every time it looks like it's breaking lower, and it pops higher. But what we are seeing is some pretty significant price action, or very impulsive price action. So kind of one of two things. It's either a triangle to break to the upside or a triangle to break to the downside. So it's a good place to put a little bit of a straddle option in here. I'm more inclined to think downside, given the higher time frames. We take a look at the higher time frames. You can see we're sitting pretty far extended on this structure, sitting at that 1-to-1 region. So it's more inclined to look for those shorts, but very easily we could pop higher into extended territory. So kind of just keeping an eye on which of these ways this is going to break, and then you'll look to get into that trade basically entry order above these highs will serve you pretty well. You should have upside of around about upside target of about 200 starting from 174. So it's a decent return on a short-term trade. But generally speaking, again, you're going into overextended territory. So you really want to keep your risk management nice and tight on that one. JP Morgan following the rest of the financials, although this one looks a little bit more bearish because we do have that structure we're looking for. You have nice big impulse off the highs. You have a big, nice choppy A wave, fairly decent choppy B wave, and a C wave that's popped higher. So if we start to see a little bit of downside here, that could be confirmation of our little flat pattern. It's turned into a little bit of an expanding flat in this instance. But yeah, structurally speaking, it looks good for downside, although the other financials are not showing that. So we just have to be really patient with this one and decide exactly what it is we're looking for here. Obviously, if we break the highs at 162, that's going to negate all of this price action. You may have to look at this as a bit of an expanding triangle with a break higher in that instance. But either way, we're sitting very overextended here and still more interested in the short. So basically still looking for an impulse to the downside and a corrective structure to clarify further downside down the line. Live Nation breaking lower pretty well. Nice little flag, potentially a good trade here. This should continue nicely to the downside, although you may get a little bit of a leg down and then another to complete the running triangle structure that seems to be forming in this instance. 3M broke out of our wedge and they just continued higher. Structurally speaking, it's a little bit of a mess. I'm not too interested in this one, so I'm going to let this one go. Just going to take this off the watch list. MicroStrategy, big break off the highs, continuing to the downside, looking for corrective structure to form here for further downside. Structurally speaking, we should see downside. You may get another pop higher into this little like 75 or 750 region, and all of that's going to just be part of a bigger ABCDE expanding triangle before further downside commences. Structurally speaking, impulse correction, impulse very much in play here, and we could see some serious downside on MicroStrategy moving forward. NVIDIA, we were looking for a little bit of a corrective structure for further upside, but you've seen a really strong move to the downside, going back into that corrective territory, which is unusual for such a big corrective structure. You should see this rally pretty strongly. So unless we start to chop back up to these highs, we may have seen a wave failure here as well and may start to see continuation to the downside. So we'll be watching this for some clarity down the line. Pfizer had quite a big move to the downside, but it doesn't really change the higher time frame structure. So you might find that all of this is just part of maybe a running expanding triangle or something along those lines, something corrective. You're looking at all of this as your first impulse. So it could be here for a while, but ideally we still want to see a break of the 44 region to the upside before we see a turn. So I still believe the Pfizer long is still looking good. Riot, interesting break out of our little wedge pattern, following a higher time frame degree structure. So forming a nice little flag for us here as well. I still see downside here. This should continue moving forward. Ross Stores, we're starting to break lower out of approaching the boundaries of our rising wedge. We did say this was a pretty good short here, and that has played out really nicely. We should continue to see downside here, given the structure that we're looking at. Worst case scenario is you see a move something along those lines down towards kind of 150 or further upside. But sitting where we're sitting in the wider structure, I do believe this is the top of a much bigger pattern, and we'll see much further downside moving forward. Spirit Airlines, we did say breaking here would be a decent trade, and so far so good. Structurally speaking, we might see another leg higher here. It's an A, B, C, D, E, something along those lines, or we've already seen an A, B, C, D, E, and now we're breaking lower. It's just kind of hard to trade that. We did say maybe just worth taking this trade. Once you break these lows at 33, you move to break even. So basically, you want to be a nice tight stop at this 35 region now, see what develops here. But I'm still looking for downside here, given that we're sitting on the highest structure. Starbucks, another one, we're just waiting for correct pattern to form. That's going to take some time. Seagate Technology, we believe we're on for big downside here, forming a little bit of a flag. We moved quite a long way following the highs, but I am worry that we just continue to rally if you don't take this flag as a trade, because our downside target is around about 47. Could be a very, very choppy move, or could be a very, very impulsive move, given the alternation of this is unclear. So we just have to wait and see what develops, and maybe get a little bit of risk on the table with this little flag here and see what develops over the next few days. Maybe move to break even if you need to. Otherwise, just hold with confirmation for the longer term trade. AT&T, frustrating chart, but still well within the lines of what I expect moving forward on this one. If we look at the upside target of this move, you can see we'll have room to move to the upside before turning to the downside. So we're calling for the downside for some time, but very clearly we can get up to 33 before we see that turn. And it looks like that's where it wants to go. Long drawn out seaway, which has been frustrating. But as soon as we start to see some downside and a little bit of a corrective structure, we'll be keen for this short because it should move quite strongly. These are kind of back towards our entry, a little bit concerning in terms of price action we're getting, but I did say you may have wanted to wait for a little bit of a corrective structure on the lower time frames to confirm upside and then take that to the upside. There may be a little bit of a running platform in here. It looks a little bit extended to me, but the price structure itself actually looks pretty good. So you may start to see a move to the upside. If you start to get some upside momentum, you may want to put an entry order above these highs, because that's a really good confirmation that we're going to get a nice strong leg to the upside from here up towards our full target. MasterCard kind of following the same line, but it's a little bit more of an expanding flat and very very unusual to see us breaking down back into the corrective structure so strongly. So yeah, a little bit of caution remains in this little trade here. We may actually even see this develop into a bit more of a running flat rather than a contracting / triangle. So you might see a little bit further downside here. So you can see how MasterCard and Visa are kind of not along the same lines, which means you just need to be super risk averse in trading any of this. But the structure, looking at that as a kind of works for me. But in this instance, you'd actually want to wait for this kind of 33 or 320 region before looking for a long with any conviction. But you can see how there's quite a lot of downside before we see that move there, 13%. So you might need to just be very patient with this. Maybe long Visa, short MasterCard could be a little strong. XOM just continued to march higher. Just looks a really solid structure that we were trading out of. Got some really nice downside from the 64, 59.50 region. And then that just reversed on a dime and rallied up to that 61 region, kind of approaching these highs at 62.50. So a little bit concerning as to where we're going here with the structure. We might be correcting for further upside. Oil looks like it wants to correct for further upside, but it does need another leg lower down the line. So we can start to look for a short trade up at the 64 region. Yeah, very frustrating price action at the moment in the oil market. Zoom broke lower really well, looking really good for downside. This downside should continue, given that we had such a nice big clean corrective structure. We should see this continue pretty strongly to the downside. So you want to look for your short entries if you're not in this already. LMT, strong rally to the upside. Another one that's been pretty frustrating. It was a good trade, although we probably got break even at this point. We're still looking for that short trade given the higher time frame structure. But with this kind of price action, you may see that this takes a little while to play out, and you may see something corrective along these lines before you see any meaningful downside. So you have to just wait that out. Then PayPal was looking really good, really bearish. Down price looking like it was moving. And then opening pre-market, we've had quite a strong rally. So I have to just see where we're going to go from here. I still believe downside is on the cards. I think we've come a long way, and it's time to kind of let go of a little bit of this value in PayPal, just because it's so overcooked and it's kind of following tech lower. You can see how this expanding flat is still well within lines. This little move up doesn't really mean anything. It's just a kind of counter impulse within the structure, and we could very easily see new lows by the end of the week or early next week. So we're watching for that. And then Tesla on the same story, broken out of our little head and shoulders with a little retest, leg to the downside, structurally speaking. Nice little expanding flat along the same lines as PayPal, and we should see this move to the downside the further down this goes, the more it should accelerate. The fear phase of this bubble type structure is around this 542 region. So if we start to see price in that area, we could start to see this accelerate to the downside pretty strongly. It's cool, guys. That's it for today. Obviously, not much change. Big moves this week to the downside that have been kind of countered today. So we're just kind of waiting patiently to see what the market's going to do over the next few days. And we'll picture by Monday. So we'll chat to you then. Have a good week. We'll see you then.